Today, we have lined up a few amazing speakers to share the knowledge with us. Serene Gan, who's also moderating the session for us, Eileen Chu, Sean Chan, and Amanda Williams. Over to you, Serene.
Thank you, Shivani, for the kind introduction. I'm Serene, and I'm your moderator for this panel discussion. I'm a senior legal counsel in an international property and infrastructure group. For today's webinar, we will discuss 3 topics: managing during COVID-19, creating value for your organization, and efficiency tools and technology to drive performance. We will end with a Q&A session to take any questions that you may have. Please feel free to submit any questions through the Q&A panel on your screen at any time during this session. I would like to introduce our 3 panelists. Ms. Amanda Williams. She is the General Counsel of Baruch Singapore. Ms. Elaine Chu, who is the Senior Legal Counsel and Group Data Protection Officer of Changi Airport Group. And Mr. Sean Chen. He is the General Counsel of Deloitte Southeast Asia. Thank you, Amanda, Elaine, and Sean for joining us today. Our first topic is on managing a legal team during the COVID-19 period. Amanda, what is the new normal for your legal team? And do you think any aspect of this would continue even after the vaccine or cure is found?
Well, our new normal is really different than the old normal. We are having a lot of effort being placed towards making those connections. So we have very firm standing regular meetings to interface with the team to prevent isolation and to also enable people to continue working collaboratively together. We also are using quite a lot of digital and technological solutions to support us working from home or working remotely and being able to stay on top of the work. I really think that going forward, I'd like to believe that we're going to continue talking and checking up on each other and having the meetings that we're having together going forward in our new normal, our new normal. But I really think that the biggest change that we can expect that's not just embraced by my company, but probably companies everywhere is going to be the digitalization going forward. I know that a lot of companies, mine included, have been upgrading their IT infrastructure. A lot of companies are shifting to cloud-based solutions and upgrading their security infrastructure to enable them to work remotely, not just from laptops at home, or on Wi-Fi, but even from handheld devices on your iPad or your mobile phone. I don't think that's going to reverse course. And I think that it's something that's really benefiting lawyers all over the place. It's making it a lot easier for us to work from anywhere and to respond quickly and efficiently to the queries from our internal clients or external clients as we need to. The one downside may be that it's a little bit more difficult for us to set up barriers around when we're working and when we're not working. But I expect that's just going to be one more challenge that we as lawyers will have to overcome.
Thanks, Amanda. I think it's such interesting points. Besides, the company having to embrace digitalization, also brings up issues, as you said, it's setting up boundaries, because now with people working from home, it's a bit hard to demarcate between personal and professional life. Sean, so any thoughts on the new normal and what you think would stay?
In Deloitte, actually, because we work, like you said, my position is across Southeast Asia. So actually, we have already been set up for some time to be able to work remotely, because we fly a lot and we interact a lot with the other jurisdictions in Southeast Asia. So thankfully, when COVID started, we had a fair infrastructure in place, and that was using Skype. Zoom has made things much smoother. With some of the countries, we found that their internet infrastructure isn't as strong, so it's a bit patchy. But we've noticed over time, from the time the pandemic started till now, every country seems to be improving. And I agree with Amanda. I think there's an acceleration of the digitization. It also enables us all to have a much better infrastructure and a more stable as basic as a stable internet connection for us to communicate properly and readily. But I do think we're all eager to get back to the office because I think that definitely helps in the communication and the ability to make sure that we understand one another better when we're communicating. There's a certain limit that we're all encountering already with regards to working remotely and using video conference. It communicates, I would say, 80%, but in the more difficult areas where you really need to be face-to-face, eyeball one another, read body language, that's something which I think Zoom is not in a position to play. So I do think we'll want to go back to the office, but I suspect we'll find some sort of hybrid. It will no longer be 100% office or 100% Zoom like it is now, but there'll be some sort of hybrid somewhere in between.
I think that's such an interesting point. I think the question of, and maybe it depends on company to company, how effective do you think it was, basically switching completely online through Zoom, as you said, as opposed to face-to-face? Elaine, so how has your experience been in your company?
I think broadly similar to what Sean and Amanda have described. Obviously, the big game changer has been work from home. And along with that, we've seen the development and adoption of a lot of video conferencing technologies. So that has allowed us to be interconnected even when we're not physically together, and that's a big plus. I think the flip side, though, is that for newcomers who join perhaps at the beginning of the COVID period or even somewhere in between, it becomes a lot harder to reach out and to connect. And you've got to be a lot more deliberate about incorporating these people into the fold, and also about finding your own opportunities for getting into the fold if you happen to be that newcomer. So in a way, it's made communication a lot easier for people who know each other and are familiar with each other's work. But I think on the other hand, it's made things a little bit harder for those who were not so well integrated physically to begin with. And that is something that is going to persist if this work from home arrangement continues, and we're just going to have to find new cultural ways for getting to know each other rather than saying hi over coffee or at the photocopy machine.
Thanks, Elaine. I think one thing interesting to hear is the new normal. It sounds like it's digitalization, finding ways to communicate and connect, even though you can't see face to face. And COVID-19 is, of course, an unprecedented event that impacted businesses. I'm not sure whether, your companies had any business continuity plans in place, or, they had to, on the spot come up or quickly galvanize and come up with a new plan. So Sean, what challenges did your legal team face during this period, and how did you tackle it?
I think actually one distinct problem I had is I've had 2 new members join our team during the COVID period. And the biggest challenge is trying to introduce them. Zoom is much more facilitative when you've already met someone physically. When you haven't met someone physically, I've noticed that Zoom becomes a little bit harder, but well, we all seem to be adjusting to it. So one of the difficulties I've had is making these new members integrate, understand our norms, understand our culture, understand our pitching, right? There are certain organizations have a certain commercial culture or certain reasoning that they're inclined to, and teaching them this has been quite difficult. So I've had to replace those opportunities where you can interact and watch one another and eyeball one another in the office with, I think, regular communication and updates via Zoom or via Skype, so that I can find a way to communicate and train people. So that has been quite difficult. And you sort of have to put in extra effort to maintain a communication link, especially with the new ones.
Thanks, Sean. Amanda, how about your team?
Yeah, I have to agree with Sean on this. I've had a couple of people join my team, and it's just not the same as welcoming them on board in person. I have a relatively small team for the geography that we cover, and one thing that I found myself doing before the pandemic was traveling constantly. I was either in Abu Dhabi or Shanghai, or they were coming to see me in Singapore. Or we were having, a team building or meeting with another department in another location. So there was a lot of travel, and obviously that's come to a complete halt. And that, I think, has been the most abrupt shift for us, because even though we were quite used to working at distance, you know, we knew that we were going to be able to see each other in person and have dinner together and sit down around a conference room table. Can you imagine in a conference room together with a bunch of other people? Maybe we'll get to do that again one day, but you know, that's what we would do. We would sit together, we'd brainstorm about our strategy for our departments for the coming year. We'd brainstorm problems and issues that we could solve. And you know, now we're totally having to do that. We do it over Microsoft Teams, or Zoom or Skype or what have you. It's been a difficult change for a lot of the people on my team. And really the best way that I've found for us to sort of support those people have been, unfortunately, more phone calls. So, but we try to draw the line as I'm going to call you and I'm not going to talk about work. I just want to hear how you're handling it, how you're getting through your day, what have you had for lunch. I want to make sure that you took 30 minutes just to eat and sort of decompress. And I want to make sure that, you know, at 6:30 on Friday that you're putting your work down and at least taking 24 hours to enjoy what weekend you have. And I think that's been something that a lot of managers have had to do. You know, we're sort of maybe taking a little bit more of a parental role in that respect to just try and ensure that our staff members are not burning the candle at both ends and burning themselves out during this pandemic, because we're in a high stress profession, and plus there's the stress of pandemic, plus there's the stress of not being able to leave your house, not being able to see your new boss or your new report in a city or country where they might be alone. So we're really pulling out all the stops to try to manage a lot of these new obstacles that are thrown our way.
Thanks, Amanda. I mean, I think you highlighted something, you know, quite important, and it's great your company and you are looking into it in terms of mental well-being and the stress, you know, that, you know, everyone can't be together, especially for your new members of your team who has not maybe seen you before or met you before. You know, Elaine, so do you have anything to add?
Well, I think we've all had to work a little bit harder to make sure that the intersocial relations between the team and also between the team and the other teams is going strong. So that translates sometimes into things like being a bit more deliberate about asking people, how are you? Are you all right? Is there anything that I can help you with? That works well for some, not so well for the more reticent ones. Then you have to find other ways to try and reach out to them and to connect with them. So I think overall the main challenge is actually ironic. In a way, it's so much easier to connect now. You just hop on Zoom or Teams and you press connect or dial. But on the other hand, you've got to be a lot more deliberate about how you're actually connecting on a human-to-human level with the other members of your team, so they still feel like they're included, they know the plan, and we're all marching along together.
Thanks. So Elaine, you know, certainly, you know, in this unique situation, what do you think are some of the best practices that may have come out? You know, is there any, perhaps out of this, of all the stress, you know, do you think there's any good practices that have come out from the COVID-19 period?
Without a doubt, video conferencing facilities. It makes it just so much easier to get in contact with people who are not near to you. But at the same time, of course, it's a double-edged sword, because that has become so much a norm that I'm not sure if anyone else had the experience of having one earpiece in one side and then the other earpiece in the other, because you've had two meetings going on at the same time. So it's a great thing. We're now so much more connected in terms of webinars, conferences. If you just look at the attendees, we're so much more international now. But at the same time, I guess we have to guard against communication just for the sake of communication itself, but also keep thinking about the quality of that so that this remains a best practice rather than a stumbling block.
Thanks, Elaine. I think that's an interesting point, you know, in terms of communication and dealing with people. You know, previously, I imagine this conference, we will all be physically present at maybe a, you know, because online you can have attendance or attendees from all over the world or country, and it doesn't really matter where physically you are. So perhaps one good thing, as you mentioned, is, you know, now that companies are a bit more digitalized, you know, we're able to connect better, especially with our overseas counterparts. So Sean, how has your experience been in terms of any good practices that came out of this?
Maybe I will just put together, so far we've been giving the viewpoint from what Elaine, Amanda, and I have been seeing from a position of management. So in terms of best practices, I thought, I understand the audience consists of some younger counsel, and maybe I would just draw their attention to something that the three of us have said, which is that it's been difficult to communicate to the team, especially with some of the more reticent ones. I think for the younger ones, you have to bear in mind the limitations, some disadvantages that you will have. You will no longer, it's not as easy for you to learn by observing, by interacting, by the sheer being there, hearing what others are doing, walking into another room, learning about things spontaneously. Those things are now missing. So I think it really is important for us to reach, just as we in management are reaching out deliberately to talk to our people, ask them how they're doing, what they're doing. I think it would be good if actually those who are in the reverse position, the younger ones, actually reached out and talked to their colleagues or talked even to us in management. And you know, if you've got any problems or something that you feel you need to discuss, rather than believe that you're at home alone doing it, it's important to actively, proactively reach out, go against your inclination to be reticent, to try and learn, because you need to grab these opportunities and not waste this period, because this could be with us for a very long time. This way of communicating by Zoom could be with us for quite some time, even when the vaccine comes out. And you would have to factor in your own learning and your own development. And the only way to grab those opportunities is to reach out for them, because you cannot assume that they will just come to you via Zoom somehow. So that, I would think, is the best practice to think about, that the communication ought to be two-way and demonstrating more proactiveness in this period, especially if you're in middle to junior. That's what I would think.
Thanks, Sean. I think you brought such a a different perspective, and actually now that I realize that all of you are in management, I think for maybe your subordinates or legal counsels, it's an interesting time, right? Because last time when you're physically in the office, your boss kind of knows what you're doing. Maybe you run into each other in the pantry or at lunch, so you don't really need to actively tell your boss what you're doing, because your boss sees you every day. But now that everyone's at home, out of sight, maybe out of mind, do you have any advice or tips you think that you wish, that the legal counsels would know? Any advice on, should they regularly update their boss, or how, or because if not, as you said, they keep quiet, they stay at home, out of sight, out of mind, or is it good for them to try maybe to regularly catch up with their boss? Any thoughts?
I think, well, of course, it turns on who the boss is, right? Sometimes they're just naturally more intimidated, but I think it doesn't hurt to drop an email or an IM and just say, look, I'm doing this, just want to tell you that I have these issues. I've been discussing with X, just updating and keeping posted. I mean, at our end, we are doing what we can, but frankly, that's limited too. We could have that once a month call with the whole team, but that's just once a month. Right? What's missing, like you said earlier, bumping into each other in the pantry, walking past the room and seeing a particular document and talking about it. These things are missing. So you have to be a bit more active and deliberate. I don't think it's artificial. I think it's deliberate. It's different. So you don't have to think you're being artificial or managing up. I think you should just proactively think about the development of your own skill set and your own career, and work hard at doing it, and find means. Every organization has its own culture, how this ought to be done. Some bosses like to be reached out by email. Some bosses like to have phone calls. Figure out what works for you, and then build it from there.
Thanks, Sean. Amanda, what are your thoughts on this topic?
I think that Sean makes a great point, that this really can be looked at as an opportunity for self-development, especially for junior or mid-level lawyers. And I think sort of the visualization exercise where you put yourself in the shoes of your manager, because all managers have a manager. We all have a boss, whether it's, the CEO or the board of directors or whoever. We answer to someone. And I think it's a universal truth, and feel free to challenge me, but I think it's a universal truth that no boss likes to be surprised. So if I would offer any advice to anybody out there, put yourself in your boss's shoes and try and ask, is this information that is going to surprise my boss? And how can I communicate that to him or her before she is surprised? And I think that if you go from that basic level, you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. You'll figure out if they like emails, if they prefer a phone call, if they want a once a week, or if they want a daily sort of update on what's happening. For me personally, I'm kind of a no news is good news type of person, but there's a lot of people out there who just have a list and they want to make sure that things have been ticked off. Just don't let your boss be surprised.
Unless it's a pleasant surprise, of course.
A birthday cake, that was a surprise, but other than that, maybe a surprise.
So I think during the COVID-19, besides it being a unique situation where we have to work from home and digitalize, there has been a lot of new laws, as I think the governments are trying to tackle the situation. So I think maybe one of the top priorities perhaps is learning and development, right? How do you keep abreast of all the new laws and measures that's come into place, especially if you're looking after different countries? So Sean, how does your team tackle learning and development?
Well, frankly, we're quite old school. I still have sort of an apprenticeship model because of my background in practice. So for example, right now what I do is when juniors ask questions, sometimes I typically arrange Zoom calls for more than just that person asking the question, just so we're all listening on the same call and contributing views. And I think I'm trying to do what I can within the limits of video conferencing or Skyping or phone calls, and try and still have that environment of mutual learning if I can. I mean, the other obvious ones obviously is where there are difficult problems, we try to arrange training sessions to do hypotheticals and to run through those problems together. And of course, the other way is ourselves keeping abreast of all matters. I mean, right now the law firms are bending over backwards to send out info memos or emails on pretty much any development that happens out there, and you get 10 emails on the same thing from all different law firms. I think that's been quite good. It's a bit of an information overload, so but they've been useful for my team to stay in touch with developments. So that's how we do it.
Amanda, so how has your team's approach been to learning and development?
We've taken a similar approach. We're taking advantage of let's say the free sharing of information from law firms all over the place. Similarly, industry groups are putting out a lot of information right now. There's a lot of I think new information right now because of this pandemic. There's created a lot of gray spaces in the law and new emerging corrections in the law. So people are quite anxious to put out the newest directions, because nobody wants to be on the wrong end of that test case. You always want to be on the right side of it. We also are, in my team, I've tasked the team with doing their own sort of research and education and preparing white papers that we circulate amongst each other to share information. We make sure that we train each other as well, which is sort of along the same lines as the apprenticeship that Sean was referring to make sure that we're still not only interacting on a personal level, but teaching each other and sharing our knowledge. It's kind of easy for us because my team is scattered in many different regions. So people tend to be very fascinated with anything new that's coming out of China. And thank goodness for China, there's always a new law and some new regulation or development that is really actually worth discussing and worth analyzing. So that's fantastic. And similarly, there's been a lot of new developments in the Mideast, and India as well. So that's taking up a lot of our sort of learning and development and training space. And for that, it's maybe sort of an unexpected benefit of the difficult situation that we're all in is that I think that this is a really sort of fruitful learning environment. And, another opportunity for the junior and mid-level lawyers out there to really sort of take advantage of that. LinkedIn as well has a lot of low cost or free trainings, personal development coaching programs, how to mentor, how to conduct a job interview, all sorts of things that can be really helpful for your personal and professional development. So I'd really encourage everyone to sort of grab with both hands any free or low cost learning that you can take advantage of right now. If you're going to be sitting in front of the computer anyway, you could be improving yourself and developing yourself.
Thanks, Amanda. I think it's a useful reminder for everyone that there's a lot of free resources out there. So, take this opportunity to, utilize it while we are, as you said, we're working from home. Elaine, any thoughts?
I think a lot of learning within the team right now is self-driven. There are so many free webinars, platforms that people can attend in their respective subject areas and get up to speed if they want to. So that has been one positive development that COVID has brought about. On the other hand, we have always had some of the more established channels for updating, so that we do have monthly meetings where we update on the latest developments in our subject areas, and that goes on PowerPoint. We share it around. So that has continued and has helped to keep everyone abreast of the developments that they need to know about. I think also the team has been quite helpful in terms of forwarding things that might not be in their own immediate subject areas, but they think might be of relevance to someone else in the team. Then they just forward it and say, this might be of interest to you if you want to take a look at it. And that also helps the team as a whole to grow in terms of knowledge management.
Thanks, Elaine. Sounds like sharing is caring. So, as I think Sean had earlier raised, there might be a bit of a lot of information going around. So if you find something useful, why not just forward it to your team members if you think it's of interest to them? So let's move on to our second topic on creating value for your organization. Perhaps a unique situation now with COVID-19, as I mentioned, maybe out of sight, out of mind, perhaps. And sometimes some may think that legal is a cost center and sometimes a roadblock for deals. Sean, what are your views on creating value for your organization and to change this perception?
I think, so there's some basics I always remind my team, right? Ultimately, we're experts in the law, but the law must always have a context. So in our case, the context is our organization. That's the first context. And the second is the business that it does, right? And the third element is it must be practicable. So what do I mean? The law is the law. So I mean, it's our job, and we've been talking about this for the past 10 minutes. Make sure we know what we're talking about. And if you don't know, you have to say you don't know and own up to it and figure out a way to go. Of course, if you say that too many times, then you're incompetent. But that's another story, right? So you got to know what you got to know as a lawyer. But I think it's important for it to be context-driven, and that's where we value add. I've heard some in-house counsel say that really it's our job just to tell the law. But I think if you do that, then just remember that you're not really value adding. What the business people always want to hear is, how do I solve my problem? So don't just tell me what the law is, tell me how to solve my problem. You may give some ideas to them, you may qualify it, but you should make sure that your answer matches the business problem that they have. That's the first thing. And the second thing I think you have to think about is it practicable? So does it involve extraordinary cost? Does it involve extraordinary resource? You have to ask these questions. So if you give them a solution, even if it matches, it solves the problem, but if it can't be operated on or if it costs too much, then you need to find another solution. And the way you do that, I think, is through training and making sure you consult enough to make sure you have an awareness. So I think it's for all of us to make sure that we value add to the organization in these ways. We can't just look at a problem as a law school hypothetical. I think those days are over. The in-house of maybe 10, 20 years ago could get away with that. I think that's no longer the case. And I just want to add one more point. Your business people are very smart. There was a time where people looked at the lawyers because they thought the lawyers were smart. The truth is the business people are as smart as you are or smarter than you are. So it's important that when you walk in, you recognize that the solution is a team game. It can't be you telling them what to do. It's you working with them to solve the problem. So I think that we have to change our mindset on that. And I think that's important. I always drive that across to all my team members about how we solve contextually and practically.
So Elaine, what are your thoughts on that?
So I think the first principle, similar to what Sean has said, must always be to be goal-orientated and to be a team player, your business partner to the business units, right? So oftentimes they come to you and say, can I do this deal or can I not do this deal? And if your answer is yes, you can, actually they're not really interested in all your legal justification for why you can or cannot do it. It's only at the no, maybe you can't, or there might be some problem stage that you might start becoming perceived as a roadblock. And at that point, I think it's important to think of yourself as a problem solver, not so much a lawyer. Think in terms of options, maybe not an absolute no, but if you do it this way, the risk is very high. If you do it the other way, you might bring down the risk somewhat. If you choose to walk away, then the company stays very safe. So at least they know where the boundaries are, and then they get to weigh in with the commercial side of things as well, and to come to, as Sean said, a group solution. So it's not a case of being laying down a law and saying this is what the law says in today's context, but it's about working with the other business units with their unique expertise, contributing your own expertise and trying to come up with a solution that is better as a whole than what a single discipline could have come up with on its own.
Amanda, what's your approach towards this?
Yeah, I think I have a similar approach. I mean, I'm painfully aware that I cost a lot of money to my organization. So I'm constantly looking for ways that myself and my team can add value. And I think, like Elaine said, and Sean as well, the days of just answering yes, no, this is the law is really over. Nobody's interested in that. And I don't think that we can, sit in our offices and just feel good about the fact that we know the law and nobody else does, because that's not the case. It's most important for us as in-house counsel that we understand what the business objective is and help them achieve their objective in a legally compliant manner. If we do it in a way that saves money, that's a bonus. If we do it in a way that adds a couple of other, objectives into one big deal, then that's extra, and that's what we get credit for. At the end of it, it's more of a strategy. We're able to see the big picture and the long goal. Marketing wants to do this, but finance needs to have this aspect. How can we tie it all together in a deal bow and deliver that to them so that they can execute? And I think that's where a lot of our value lies. As well, for my team, I find that a lot of people are curious about the law, but not curious enough to go to law school. So we try to deliver a lot of trainings. Why your indemnity clause is important in your contract, so it's for us in the long run. We're not answering all the questions when they have an issue with their customer. They know how to answer that question. They know why we insist on Singapore law, what are the reasons, and why they're important to us as a company. So a lot of these sort of free informational trainings that we do, it serves a couple of purposes for me. It in the long run gives us a little bit less work on the tedious details of what's the ins and outs of a contract. It's a PR campaign. I think it makes the lawyers a little bit more friendly, a little bit more accessible. And it also gives a little bit of useful knowledge to the business team, who, as Sean said, they're a lot smarter than they maybe have gotten credit for in the past. They know a little bit about the law. Maybe they want to know a little bit more. They don't need the whole law degree. So whatever we can do to help them achieve their objectives and maybe learn a little bit along the way is always value add, and it's always going to be important for the business.
Thanks, Amanda. I think one tricky thing about legal teams, compared to other departments, is that it might be a bit difficult to measure productivities and targets, because so much of legal work depends on the business, what deals they bring in, and touch wood, if they encounter any disputes. So Amanda, do you have any strategies on how do you measure and boost the quality and productivity of a legal team?
Yeah, it is a fine line, right? Because we do need to react to emergencies and the priorities of other departments, but at the same time, that's not really an efficient way to operate. So we do also need to plan and budget for expenses and allocate resources. So I think maybe that's another sort of skill that in-house counsel has to develop, the reaction and also the proaction.
All right, so Sean, any thoughts about strategies, how to boost quality and productivity of your legal team?
I think that again, maybe I just direct this based on where we are in the seniority chain. I suppose if you're a junior, then the fundamental work quality always has to be there, how responsive you are, the quality of your drafting, the quality of your responses. I mean, that is something that I certainly always look out for, and I always chase and I always beat on. I think if you're at the middle level, then I think I would be looking out for people who are able to show initiatives, provide alternatives, some alternatives to the businesses to solve the problem and how to drive a particular project forward, whether it's a contract negotiation or a particular piece of advice, and how they drive it and manage it is important. So I think we look out for these things. And I think what I do is exactly what I've just said. I sort of highlight, so well, in this area, depending on your seniority, these are the things that I want to be looking out for. And I want to make sure that the quality of these is high. Of course, it turns on training, hiring quality people, making sure they have the right opportunities. In terms of productivity, it's really just about deliverables and responsiveness and quality. I mean, that's how we do it. Again, very old school, practice traditional style. Yeah.
So Elaine, do you have any thoughts on this topic?
Start with the right people in your team. Start with people who are self-motivated, driven, very eager to learn, and then give them a long leash. In a lot of ways, I guess productivity goes up when you're motivated and when you can see that there is value in what you're doing. So from the management perspective, I guess the job would be to try and set the tone for the perception of value, that what you're doing actually is meaningful and is contributing to the organization. But that said, the people who are being managed also do need to take some control of their own destiny in terms of being proactive about thinking about how the quality and productivity of their work can grow. And in fact, when it comes to KPI setting, a lot of times there is quite a lot of scope, I think, for the juniors to come up and say, I think this is an exciting area. It's something that I think will help the team in the next year. I would like to focus on this. And so shape their own KPIs rather than have us tell them, okay, for the next year, this is what I think you need to do. Of course, we have some higher level goals that we would want the team as a whole to achieve. But that said, it's really for the team itself to also think about how it would fit itself within those broader objectives that we're trying to achieve, and to make it work for their own agendas and their own career development as well.
Thanks, Elaine. I think that's a pretty good point in that, for, I suppose, the junior or legal counsels out there, that, instead of just waiting for your boss to set your KPIs, do consider, setting or suggesting KPIs as well. If you think it'll help you in your career growth, or you think it'll help add value to the department or to the company. So that's a pretty good reminder, I think, for all the legal counsels out there. We have to move to our last topic, which is on efficiency tools and technology to drive performance. Elaine, how has your experience been with tools and technology in your legal work?
I would say mostly hits, of course, some misses. We are an organization that is in the midst of digitization and transformation. So we are, as a whole, not just the legal department, but the entire organization is very interested in looking at tools and technology and how that might help us to perform our work better today. So in relation to that, the legal team has been looking, of course, at some of the run-of-the-mill things, legal resources, with COVID, digital signature platforms as well. But we're also starting to explore things like contract repositories, automated ways of vetting contracts, or even how things like chatbots might be able to help us to deal with some of the day-to-day repetitive queries that we get. So I think the experience has taught us that when it comes to tools and technologies, it has to be, first of all, people-driven. Your technology is only as good as the people who use it. And then second, outcome-driven. So there's no point adopting a technology just for the sake of adopting the technology, but really think about what is the value proposition that technology will bring to the team as a whole. I mean, with things like electronic signatures, the value proposition is self-evident today. We can't even meet, so we need some way of doing this electronically. But for some of the other tools, a lot of times they look bright, they look shiny, but whether it really works for your organization as opposed to other organizations really depends on the working style and the composition of the group as well.
Thanks, Elaine. Amanda, how has your department harnessed tools and technology?
Like Elaine said, it's mostly hits, but yeah, a few misses. One thing I think that is very relevant that Elaine shared is that you can't always, especially right now, afford the bright shiny object, especially if it's not absolutely critical to your department's success. So it may sound really great to have a fancy pre-built contract repository, but if it's not actually tailored to be as efficient or just exactly what you need without an additional bunch of stuff that comes in the package but may not be absolutely necessary, it's not really going to add the value that you need, especially during this time. So one thing that we've done a lot of is collaborating with our IT department to actually sort of build the IT tools that we've needed. We've created our own sort of web-based SharePoint where we can store contracts, where we can collaboratively work on a document together. We're also using the common tools like WhatsApp and WeChat to talk to each other when we have a quick question or if we need to make a quick phone call just to confirm details. And then MS Teams and some other sort of Zoom, for example, for more group-based communications and presentations. So I mean, a lot of that's really important. And like we said in the beginning, I don't think any of that's going away. I think that's just the direction that legal practice is going to be going forward. And I think that the difference between those who are successful in this new world and those who are not are going to be the lawyers who can quickly adapt and who can quickly adopt these tools and make the best use of them, especially if you can make it your own, rather than going to the technology store and buying everything that you can afford off the shelf, whether it makes sense for you or not. Really knowing and understanding what the technology is that you need and how it's going to help you get to your end goal. And really, that's what it is. It's a tool, right? So we need to have these things to make us more efficient, to make us faster, to make us answer more quickly, to make us more responsive to our internal clients. And if it's not doing that, it's the wrong tool. So those would just sort of be some of the guidelines that we look at anyway, on which tools we are going to embrace and what kind of technology we need to operate now and going forward.
Thanks, Amanda. I think that's an interesting tip, actually, that, perhaps in-house, especially if you're in a tech company or a company with a very strong IT department, perhaps, instead of spending that extra money to find external resources, one thing to consider is what do you have in-house that you can use. Sean, so how has been your experience?
Yeah, we're in the transition stage. I think I'm like Amanda. We sort of use those tools, technology tools, but not necessarily legal tech-specific tools. For example, we do use SharePoint or Teams to collate documents to make sure that across offices in Asia we can share documents together in a secure way. We communicate using Skype in place of, say, WhatsApp, because there's an internally controlled chat, and of course for video conferencing we use Zoom, Teams, or Skype. In terms of legal specific tech, we have been looking into ways to monitor. So for example, when we do litigation or consult on contentious matters, in order to monitor that across the region, we have a system in place for monitoring and reporting. But apart from that, the dream tech has not been used. I've not indulged in any of the technology that will help me do vanilla contract reviews. Certainly not to help pick up difficult clauses that we can advise on or to be able to channel. Those things are still, I think, in the nascent stage. I'm still studying them. I'm looking at the possibilities of using technology to help us in contracts review, but I find that a lot of the technology isn't quite ready or requires a lot of commitment and time to feed into the database, to train it, to enable it to learn. And I think right now my organization doesn't have the stomach for that. So we have to wait for the right time to bring on those technologies when they are ripe enough, I think.
Thanks, Sean. I think that leads on to an interesting point, Amanda, in that, of course, based on the discussion, it seems like tools and technology can be helpful in terms of, boosting productivity of the legal department. But what do you think are the biggest challenges in adopting technology for in-house counsels? Do you think it's about As Sean said, maybe lack of technology suitable for in-house counsels, lack of budget, or is it difficult to get, the buy-in from the business?
So two things maybe. As Sean said, it can be really sort of difficult to accept that this new technology is going to do a contract review as well as we can. It's an incredible leap of faith to entrust that the AI is going to not make a mistake. You can blame a person, but it's difficult to blame AI with something that may cause a huge problem for your internal client or your business.
Sean, what do you think is the biggest hurdle to adopting technology for in-house counsels?
I think personal inertia is hard. I mean, in an earlier conversation I had with Elaine, I'm just very impressed with how her organization has embraced technology. I think for the lawyers, I think it's a psychological one. Like Amanda says, are you able to trust the bot to do the contract review? I'm sure at the back of our mind, that's what we are thinking. And I've talked to people who run these software, and I've sat down with an entrepreneurial lawyer who's actually designed technology, and I think we're still reluctant to make that leap of faith. So I guess the analogy I have is to, in terms of legal technology, where with the very first camera phone, it can take a shot, but it's kind of grainy and hazy, and you're not really sure. We're not hit a point where today's iPhone, which can take photo shots as good as a normal camera. So I think I'm waiting for that time where I'm comfortable that the technology really is good enough before I really jump on board. So I think the barrier right now is probably a confidence and faith issue, like Amanda.
Elaine, do you have anything to add?
I think a lot of it has to do actually with buy-in. Many departments I know complain about there not being enough budget for the technology, but the truth is if management believes that there is a need for this, then resources will be reprioritized to make it happen. So in terms of buy-in, then you have to deal with the usual questions. Is this going to make my life harder? Is it going to be so difficult to learn that I might as well be doing it the old way? Is this going to make me expected to do work at twice the pace than I was expected to? So my KPIs have now doubled. And of course, things like, is it actually even going to generate the correct result? Which goes back to the first point. Is it going to make my life harder having to unwind a transaction that was messed up by an AI than having just done the work myself? So a lot of it has, I think, to do with how you onboard the technology. I think for organizations that are starting out, maybe think about scalability. Start with something small on a trial basis that you can test until your users are satisfied that it's going to be helpful before you take the next step into buying something bigger, and then move from there. So try not to take the big plunge into it. So really it's about convincing, I think, the tribe as a whole that it makes sense to adopt this new tool, and this new tool is going to be helpful. It's not going to cause you problems, or at least not beyond the teething stage. And then after that, you'll find that life is so much better. Like there's so many senior management personnel I knew who were initially very skeptical about Zoom and whether or not it was going to work out. But today you see boards, directors, all over the world hopping onto Zoom very comfortably because we're all more or less bought into the idea today that overall it's a better thing than the cons that it brings. So there you go, technology.
Thanks, Elaine. We've come to the Q&A session. For our audience members, if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them in the Q&A panel. So our first question touches on the first. Okay, so I think the first topic, right, touches on the COVID-19 situation. Everyone is working remotely. You can't exactly see what your subordinates or your members or your legal team are doing. So do you have any tips on how do you track the legal team productivity, especially in this context where, unfortunately, due to the economic environment, you may be facing pressures from your CEO, CFO to show that everyone's pulling their weight. Perhaps let me ask Sean for his thoughts on this.
Well, actually, I was going to Well, I would just refer to what we said earlier. I think we've been expanding our team and not shrinking it in my organization, because if anything, COVID has shown, it's shown that we're very relevant in helping to assess problems that come out of COVID, and they come out in very different ways. How to interpret COVID-related legislation is the most obvious one. How to interpret the distress of clients due to COVID, whether they're how to go against them from a litigation perspective, how to interpret contracts with them to determine whether there are break clauses or not. So I think it goes back to what all of us, both Elaine and Amanda and I, were saying much earlier. You show a value add by showing how to solve the business problems and not just giving them the law. And I think if you do that, and if they want to bring you into the room when they have a business problem, you know you've shown your value add. When they call you into a problem that's not obviously legal, they just know they have a problem and they brought you into that conversation, that's where you know you value added to the organization. Or rather, that's an easy litmus test, I think.
Thanks, Sean. Elaine, any thoughts on this?
I would think the one thing you would want to try to get to is not that the CLO is making the value proposition to the CFO, but that your business partners in the different units are actually telling the CFO, I need this, guys, I need more legal help, I need more resources on it. And that would be the clearest indicator that your legal team, I think, is doing the right thing and has a very solid function within the organization. Things like tracking how many contracts you vetted in a year, how many dollars you saved, might be helpful on a peripheral sort of level, but I think it's really what your users say about you that is the strongest testament to whether or not the legal team has brought value to the organization or not.
So how do you track, or do you, as you said, build this culture where the users view legal as useful, or as you said, would help, message it to, the management that, I need legal. Legal has been really helpful in solving problems. How do you approach that, or how do you encourage that?
Be available, be helpful, be reassuring. When you walk into a room, say, okay, I know that we are facing something, but there are options and let's go through them. Let's see how we can make the best of it. We do actively ask the business partners who have been working with our juniors for feedback on these juniors. So through making them think deliberately about how this person has been servicing the business unit, one, as someone who is in charge of the junior, you have an idea whether that person is developing in a good way or not. And then on the other hand, of course, it also prompts them to think, okay, now that I've written one thank you note, how about writing another one? So it's really just human interaction. The same way you'd get other people to say nice things about you, you would apply it in this situation too.
So Amanda, do you have anything to add to what Sean and Elaine said?
No, I think, they're terrific leaders and they've got the nail on the head. The best way to persuade your CFO that your department, your legal department, is adding value is by having everybody else tell the CFO that you're necessary, that you're a part of it. And like Sean said, making sure you're in the room. When they're brainstorming a new idea, when they're trying to solve a problem, if there's a legal department member in there proactively helping to resolve an issue or to achieve the objective, that's really the biggest sort of KPI or metric that you can have on your importance and your value to the organization. And a lot of it, I guess, to the junior and mid-level lawyers who are participating, a lot of this is going to involve you stretching outside of just a legal framework. As managers, we're not just managers and we're not just lawyers, but we have to know a little bit about tax, a little bit about finance, a little bit about how the marketing and the sales operations are functioning, a little bit about client development. These are opportunities for you to really develop yourself professionally and personally to add value. The better you are able to sort of engage on a personal level with what may be motivating your internal client, the better you are to identify what their issue is and to solve it. And a lot of that's not necessarily legal skill, but really more sort of interpersonal relationships and being able to understand, human nature and human interaction.
Thanks, Amanda.
Yeah, so I just want to ask Elaine, right? How do you resolve internal disagreements, especially when face-to-face contact is not quite possible?
Hmm.
Yeah.
I think start from basic human principles. If there's a disagreement, try your best to understand what the disagreement is first. That might mean reaching out to the different parties separately and just asking them, hey, what's up? Is there something I can help you with? I think then also, well, this is just my own personal view on it, but think about whether or not you can actually contribute to resolving that dispute or not, or if your participation might in fact worsen something that could be resolved if the two people in disagreement were left alone to hash it out over a period of time. I think candidness in this age where we don't always see each other face to face can be very helpful. So if after thinking through that and you think, okay, this is actually a solvable problem and it might really just be because there's some sort of miscomm out there, then I would do the same thing I would do if I was meeting people face to face. I would invite them out for coffee. Maybe in this case, it would be a Zoom chat or Zoom lunch, and just try and introduce the topic and see what comes of it. But I wouldn't force it, because like any human disagreement, if people are not happy to resolve it, then it's not going to be resolved. And as someone who is managing the people in that dispute, there's only so much you can do. Sean, Amanda, any thoughts on your end?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, Elaine. And I think just it's important to remind ourselves and to even when you're having a disagreement with someone, to just sort of re-emphasize to yourself to have a lot of empathy, because this is a very stressful time and everybody's, reacting to the stresses of the pandemic and being home and maybe working in isolation in a different way. So just have a little bit more empathy for people out there and be kind to each other.
All right. I think we need to bring our Q&A session to a close. Thank you, Amanda, Elaine, and Sean, for sharing your insights with us today.